Another strand of this Sabbateanism came through and manifested as people like the House of Rothschild. They're not Jewish, they are Sabbateans who pose as Jewish while following this satanic religion. Because in the next century, after Sabbatai Zevi, along came Jacob Frank, who Jewish sources that I quote in the book call one of the most frightening people in Jewish history. He was not actually Jewish, except officially. He was another Sabbatean. He claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And the cult became known as Sabbatean Frankism. And he really advanced the infiltration, Donne style, of the Roman Catholic Church.
First of all, Mr. Icke says Jacob Frank and his followers advanced the infiltration of the Roman Catholic Church. Yet, as I have shown from Christian Elements in Early Frankist Doctrine, page 14, footnote 3, by Paweł Majsejko, senior lecturer in Jewish thought at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, quote, according to Stanislaw Zalaski, who was a Jesuit priest, Jezuisi Polski, Krakow 1908, the Frankists were supplied with theological arguments against the Talmudists by Father Konstanty Awodwick and other Jesuits in Lwów. Indeed, Konstanty Awodwick was Frank's Jesuit biographer and handler. One of these theological arguments supplied by the Jesuits to the Frankists was explicitly identified by Majsejko in The Mixed Multitude, Jacob Frank and the Frankist Movement, 1755 to 1816, as the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. Certain academics outrightly argue that the influence in Frankist theses was entirely Catholic. Quote, some scholars have claimed that the ostensibly Frankist theses advanced during the disputations were not Frankist at all, but were composed entirely by Catholic theologians and rephrased only slightly so that they would resemble Jewish documents. Major Balban, for example, assumed that the points for the debate had been formulated by Polish priests and then given to the Frankists, who filled in the gaps with quotations from Jewish sources. Alexander Krusha went even further, claiming that Catholic theologians who knew Hebrew and could work with Talmudic sources orchestrated the entire debate in advance. So we see that Mr. Icke's statement is diametrically opposed to the historical record. It was not the Frankists who infiltrated Catholicism, it was the Jesuits who exerted influence over the Frankists. To drive this point home, Frank and all of his followers ended up converting en masse to Catholicism, with the King of Poland, also a Catholic, serving as their sponsor.
And eventually, the whole Christian Zionist movement came out of this.
Christian Zionism is based on futurist eschatology, devised by more Jesuits, Francisco Ribera, S.J., and Manuel Lacunza, S.J.
The vast overwhelming majority of which have no idea about the background. So this Sabbatean Frankist cult created Israel, posing as, followers of Judaism, etc., to scam the general Jewish population that they actually represented them, when actually they're a cult.
You can read in my article, The Most Dominant Strain of Zionism Controls the Israel-Palestine Dialectic, to see that the Jesuit papacy has always desired Jerusalem for itself, but specifically regarding the creation of Israel, it was the British General Allenby who captured Jerusalem from the Muslims in 1917. So celebrated was the capture that it was regarded by the Catholic Christian world as the completion of a new crusade, with church bells ringing out in Rome, as well as the bells of London's Roman Catholic Cathedral. You can read that in Jerusalem in the 20th Century, page 55, by Martin Gilbert. Major Vivian Gilbert, who was in the 20th Century Battle of Jerusalem, even wrote a book called The Romance of the Last Crusade, with Allenby to Jerusalem. The Balfour Declaration was made for British interests to appeal to the huge Jewish population then gaining power in Russia, with the idea having been to persuade Russia to remain in the war on the side of the Allies to ultimately take down the Ottoman Empire, one of the Jesuits' major goals of World War I. The Mossad later was founded by a Knight of Malta ex-Nazi, Reinhard Gehlen. Additionally, Louis Mortimer Bloomfield was recognized as one of the pioneering founders of the Nation of Israel. Bloomfield was trained by Jesuits at St. Francis Xavier University and Catholic St. Thomas University. Finally, as revealed in the early 1990s, the fundamental agreement between the Holy See and State of Israel promised the Vatican jurisdiction over Jerusalem, which came to pass through Shimon Peres, another court Jew groomed in his youth by Polish Jesuits. According to the late journalist Joel Bannerman, quote, "The public record shows a secret deal has already been conducted behind the backs of the Israeli public, whereby the Vatican was promised to take over the old city of Jerusalem. There's ample proof in the public record to prove that a secret deal was done with the Vatican by two Israeli government representatives, Yossi Beilin and Shimon Peres. As it was concocted covertly, it can't serve the Israeli public, but someone else."
And there's a chapter in the book called Atlantic Crossing, where I talk about how this cult moved in on America. And this is the cult that is protected by this expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to stop any legitimate investigation of the cult.
Why is it, Mr. Icke, that the ADL, the top anti-Semitic watchdog agency, gives out an award named after a Jesuit priest? The Cardinal Bey Interfaith Award. I'll tell you why. It is because at the Second Vatican Conference, the Jews fully submitted themselves to the papacy, with the aforementioned Jesuit Cardinal Bey leading the deal. This is why you will hardly find any modern Jewish scholars who are critical of the Vatican. The only one I know of is David Kurtzer. The Jews now regard the murderous Pius XII as legitimate savior of their people, while in reality that man contributed immensely to the acceleration of the extermination of Jewish people in the 20th century in Europe.
Because this Sabbatean Frankist cult moved in on America. It infiltrated the CIA and these agencies. It infiltrated the Pentagon. It infiltrated and massively funds American politics.
The CIA was started by Knight of Malta, William Donovan, with the help from another Knight of Malta, Reinhard Gehlen, and has always been dominated by Roman Catholic directors. Again, Mr. Icke is full of it, just making things up as he sees fit.
The Project The New American Century, this crowd, produced a document calling for American troops to fight multiple theater wars in the Middle East and elsewhere to remove regime change a series of governments and leaders.
As I show in my video on 9/11, the Project for a New American Century was a front group for JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, headed by a Jewish man named David Steinman, who received instructions from the Jesuits at Georgetown University.
And so you had all these different areas, before, during, and after, covered by ultra-Zionists, and including Michael Chertoff, who oversaw the whole of the non-investigation.
Michael Chertoff showed his submission to his papal masters when paying respects at the tomb of John Paul II in Rome. Michael Chertoff's wife is a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University. Michael Chertoff was appointed a prosecutor by Rudy Giuliani, who is a devout Roman Catholic. The rest of Mr. Icke's video talks in general about 9/11, and then he starts talking about metaphysics and other nonsense. However, if Mr. Icke wishes to debate me on this Jewish issue, he may contact me through my YouTube or Reddit accounts.